On January 20th, 2021, President Joe Biden wasted no time in getting to work for the American people, signing a number of executive orders to reverse many of the Trump administration policies. In particular, President Biden signed multiple executive orders, proclamations, and memoranda addressing immigration issues. Indeed, the amount of changes on just day one to U.S. immigration policy was so great that each change deserves its own video explanation. With this video, we're going to start with one of the most important actions taken by President Biden on his first day in office, and that action is a change in immigration enforcement priorities. My name is William Kovatch, and I am a trained immigration lawyer. I've often been disappointed in the way immigration issues are talked about in the media, although it's not always their fault. Immigration law can be a very complex subject, touching upon constitutional issues as well as personal political points of view. My goal is to explain immigration law to you, concentrating on looking at judicial opinions and executive actions in order to explain how immigration law can have an impact on our community and on our country. I hope that you'll join me as we try to make sense of immigration law and how it may affect the average person. In order to fully appreciate the breadth of the changes that President Biden has already implemented, it's necessary to go back 6 years. At that time, President Obama recognized that the resources available to the United States government to enforce immigration law are limited. It is estimated that we have over 11 million people in this country today who are present without legal authorization. The cry from the far right has been that we ought to enforce our immigration laws strictly as they are written without change, and that therefore we need to make concrete efforts to remove all 11 million people who are here without legal authorization. But President Obama recognized that this was just not practical. For one thing, the United States government cannot just simply go around the country and pick up people that we believe to be foreigners and, without legal authorization, just kick them out of the country. The United States is a diverse country. We have people in this country who are legally present and indeed who are U.S. citizens from all over the world. They may speak with many different accents. They may look somewhat different. But rounding up people for mass removal simply because we believe they may be present illegally, that's a gross violation of due process. In order to properly remove a person who is currently present in the United States, we need evidence. We need evidence with regard to who that person is and to show that they have no legal immigration status. Plus, merely being present in the United States without a legal immigration status does not mean in all cases that the person must be removed. To the contrary, U.S. immigration law provides many undocumented aliens a defense against removal. And this is true despite whether that person, who may have a well-founded fear of persecution, entered the United States illegally, is present without legal status, or even overstayed his or her visa. If that person can meet the elements of an asylum claim, then they may be entitled to remain in the United States and gain legal status. And under our Constitution, we must give aliens that the government intends to remove due process. That means they must be given their day in court to present their argument and evidence why, even though they may be present illegally, they are nonetheless entitled to stay in the country. So before we can remove an alien, there must be a hearing, and the alien must be given an opportunity to be heard. And so, with around 11 million people currently present in the United States without legal status, you can see the impracticality of arresting each and every one of them and placing them in court proceedings and then holding hearings on whether the United States ought to be able to remove them. This requires courtrooms, it requires judges, clerks, administrative personnel, and of course, lawyers. This is why enforcement resources are limited. Recognizing this, President Obama established a set of priorities to guide the U.S. Department of Homeland Security on whom it should target for removal proceedings. The president made it clear that U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, or ICE, should concentrate on those aliens who are a danger to national security or a threat to the public safety. For President Obama, this meant concentrating on aliens with criminal convictions or who have committed a criminal act. More importantly, it meant concentrating resources on those undocumented aliens who have committed violent criminal acts. To that end, back in November of 2014, the heads of ICE, the U.S. Customs and Border Protection, and U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services issued a memorandum that outlined the enforcement priorities and how immigration officials ought to exercise their discretion in executing and enforcing immigration law. The important concept to understand here is discretion, specifically a concept called prosecutorial discretion. You see, just because a person is suspected to be in violation of the law, that does not mean that the government is required to prosecute that person. Think of when you get pulled over by a traffic ticket. Sure, a police officer has the legal authority to issue a traffic citation, and if the offense is bad enough, to issue a summons to compel you to go to court. But that police officer has the discretion to let you off with a warning. Sir, I caught you doing 5 miles over the speed limit, but I've decided to give you a warning. Please drive safely and have a good day. Well, the same thing applies to immigration law, and it applies at all levels of enforcement of immigration law. An ICE officer is not required to take a person into custody just because they are present here illegally. An ICE officer is not necessarily required to begin removal proceedings against every undocumented alien. And even if that person is in court in removal proceedings, the ICE attorney can choose to support administratively closing the case without actually seeking a removal order. And so, through that November of 2014 memorandum, the heads of the Immigration Enforcement and Administration agencies established a set of criteria to evaluate in order to determine whether an undocumented person should be forced to go through removal proceedings. The criteria included things like whether the alien had a criminal record, what was the nature of the crimes committed, were they violent crimes or petty offenses, did the aliens have regular employment, and even if that employment was technically illegal itself, did the aliens pay taxes, did the aliens have any family ties to any U.S. citizens or legal permanent residents, and do the aliens have any children that they need to take care of? By weighing these factors, immigration enforcement officers were encouraged to exercise prosecutorial discretion in appropriate cases and not waste valuable enforcement resources on people who were not a threat to the national security or a danger to the public safety. But when Donald Trump assumed office 4 years ago, he reversed all of that. Facially, he called for the enforcement of U.S. immigration laws against criminal aliens. But the far right argued that those present in the United States illegally are in violation of criminal law and thus have committed a criminal act. And in that regard, it is technically true that crossing the border without a visa and crossing at a point that's not designated as a port of entry, that is a violation of U.S. federal criminal law. Although first-time offenders are usually guilty of a misdemeanor, and if they are prosecuted, they are typically sentenced to maybe a few days incarceration at best. At any rate, up until the Trump administration, first-time offenders were rarely prosecuted. Prosecution was usually reserved for multiple offenders or offenders who had otherwise had a removal order but nonetheless came back to the United States. Still, based on the arguments of the far right, on January 25, 2017, a few days after taking office, President Trump signed an executive order. This order revoked the November of 2014 memorandum, which encouraged immigration authorities to exercise prosecutorial discretion. That is, it revoked the encouragement that immigration authorities should look for those appropriate cases where it made sense to choose not to enforce immigration law against an undocumented alien who did not pose a threat to the national security or public safety. Instead, under the Trump administration, U.S. immigration law was to be enforced against all criminal aliens, which meant it was to be enforced against all aliens present in the United States without legal authorization. This zero-tolerance mentality led to the infamous humanitarian crisis, where families were being separated at the border so that parents could be prosecuted under the law while the children remained in detention without their parents, and in many instances, were never reunited with their parents. The irony here is that despite revoking the ability of immigration enforcement officials to exercise discretion in choosing whom to target for removal, the removal numbers under the Trump administration fell, and quite significantly, when compared to the removal numbers of the Obama administration. The Trump administration simply removed fewer aliens in general, and indeed fewer aliens with criminal records, than the Obama administration did. At any rate, this strict enforcement policy led to some bitter criticism to the administration's actions. Areas once considered off-limits to immigration enforcement, such as schools, churches, homeless shelters, and even state courtrooms, were no longer off-limits. So immigration officials were reported to have taken people into custody immediately after those people had dropped their children off to school, for example. It was even reported that ICE had taken a woman into custody after she had sought a protective order in state court from an abusive domestic partner who happened to be a U.S. citizen. These very actions call into question who we are as a people and what morals and values guide our government. And to that end, one of the first executive orders that President Biden signed was to revoke President Trump's executive order from January 25, 2017. President Biden's goal was to inject greater sanity and compassion into U.S. immigration enforcement actions. No longer will aliens present in the country illegally be subject to the full enforcement powers of the United States government. As of the time of this recording, President Biden has not replaced the Trump executive order with any new criteria to guide immigration officials in deciding how to enforce the law and against whom to enforce it. Presumably, President Biden will want to concentrate resources once again on those aliens who are a danger to the national security or a threat to the public safety. It is notable that this action occurred at a time when President Biden is expected to send a bill to the Senate to create a pathway to citizenship for many of those 11 million people who are present in the country without legal authorization. The idea being that immigration officials ought to stop strict enforcement when many of those undocumented aliens who have otherwise been law-abiding residents may qualify for relief under such a pathway should it pass Congress. And so, with this executive order, President Biden has signaled a more humane approach to the enforcement of U.S. immigration law than that of his immediate predecessor. Thank you for watching. Please remember to like and subscribe. If there are any topics you would like me to address in the future, please let me know in the comments below. Now, I don't like talking about this, but I am currently disabled because of complications following cancer surgery. If you're feeling generous, I'll have a link to my PayPal account in the description below. Thank you.